The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. Welcome to Pediatric Perspectives, where we are taking a look at children's health challenges from a different perspective, one that involves critical thinking, one where we're not afraid to ask the tough questions, and one where we bring on some of the best guests in the world. Today, I have back with us Dr. Ben Edwards. Welcome back to Pediatric Perspectives, Ben.
Hey, Dr. Paul, thank you so much for having me back.
Our topic today is measles, and you, to me, are the country's premier, most experienced doctor, hands down, dealing with measles, because you took care of that massive outbreak that happened in Texas in 2025, and you were in the trenches, even got measles yourself. So I always like to talk to people who really know what they're talking about because they lived it, as opposed to book knowledge. It's just different. You're a family practitioner in Texas. You founded Veritas Clinic and the Veritas Wellness Program, which is something available to all of us, no matter where you are in the world, which is phenomenal. But let's jump into measles. It seems to me, I followed this, I've written about it over my career, but measles in the United States, at least, and actually in many parts of the world, is no big deal anymore. But we get this massive fear-mongering happening periodically when there's a little uptick in the cases of measles. And of course, the fear-mongering to, you got to go get your vaccine. It seems like that's the only solution the mainstream will provide, is you got to go get a vaccine. I'm not saying that vaccine doesn't work. Actually, it's one of the ones that works fairly well, not as well as getting the natural disease. Unfortunately, it's also one of the vaccines that, from my experience and from a lot of the literature, has a lot of really severe side effects. So you just have to balance both things. But let's talk about measles itself. Do you have a sense of how much measles there is annually in the US and maybe in other countries, and where the mortality lies from measles?
My sense is it's probably underreported, actually. I've talked to a number of doctors who, because measles is basically a rash and a fever. And I actually had a patient who got diagnosed, and it was just on a whim. The doctor decided, well, I'll check this real quick, but normally would not have if it wasn't in the news. So who knows, as far as incidents of measles, what the real numbers are. But I imagine there's multiple hundreds of cases, that are documented or reported when there's outbreaks, but it waxes and wanes, comes and goes. But I really think there's probably a pretty good portion that's undiagnosed measles. And honestly, a lot of people don't trust the medical system anymore, really post-COVID. I think trust in doctors dropped from 70% down to 40%. So how many people don't even go to the doctor anymore? We see that all the time. We actually had a lady, this is a little off subject, but had a lump in her breast for 4 years and wouldn't go to a doctor to get it seen about because of fear. This very thing I'm talking about, fear of the system and what would they do. Had a person just this week didn't want to go in for a procedure because they thought they'd have to get the COVID vaccine, and even if they refused it, they would maybe give it to her secretly. It's that kind of fear. So how many cases of measles where the person's not seeking out medical care, or the clinician just not recognizing it? So it's really hard to say for sure. I do think it's on the rise overall, and will more in the future too, because of natural immunity in the community not being there anymore. My parents are 78 and 80. They both had measles, as most all folks did back in the day. Well, that group of people are getting old.
Yeah.
Hopefully my mom and dad will still be around another 20 years, but that generation's dying. And so we're into these generations that only have quote unquote vaccine immunity, which wanes and is not robust, as I found out during that measles outbreak last year. So I suspect we'll see more and more and more cases. Of course, they'll try to blame it on people not being vaccinated, but nobody's really talking about this natural immunity that's been robust for a long time, and those generations now just aren't alive anymore.
True. And of course, another factor is you could actually get measles from the vaccine. It's a live
Mhm.
virus vaccine.
Mhm.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think this still holds true. But at one point, I was looking into this, and if you go to the package insert for the measles vaccine, there's no upper limit to how much live virus they can put in those vials. There's a
Yep.
lower limit. So you don't know what you're getting in terms of a dose of a actually potentially dangerous virus, I guess. But it's not as dangerous as they make it out to seem. How many deaths, in your opinion, have there been in the US in children in the last decade or two?
From measles,
Yes.
well, it depends on the definition of that. People talk about at the highest levels in politics, especially in the media, these two girls that died from measles in Gaines County. And we know clearly because we've looked at the medical records that that's not accurate. The first little girl in particular had pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia, which isn't uncommon after any viral infection, flu, COVID, or anything else. You can get a secondary bacterial pneumonia, which is very, very easy to treat. A community acquired pneumonia can be treated with oral antibiotics, and it's not a big deal. Unfortunately, this little girl did not get the appropriate antibiotics for pneumonia. So that pneumonia progressed in her, and ultimately she succumbed to that.
Mm.
So really, I would say death was from malpractice, not giving the appropriate standard of care, medical care to that little girl. So I would not classify that as a measles death. Same with the second little girl. She had multiple confounding factors, and she also had a pneumonia. She had a hospital-acquired pneumonia, was in two different facilities, not fully treated, not appropriately treated, no sputum culture gathered. So they missed the diagnosis on her. And same thing, she died from an untreated pneumonia or inappropriately treated pneumonia. So those two I would not classify. And I think looking back prior, and I haven't looked at these numbers since last year when the media was asking me so much, so you may correct me, but it's been like maybe two in the past couple decades, and it was in someone who was immunocompromised, or there was some special circumstance. So I'm with you. In this day and age, measles should be how it was in the 1950s too, on the Brady Bunch, and people got to know during the measles outbreak. People brought up that Brady Bunch episode, but it should be a rash and a fever, and maybe some other symptoms, but those are the two primary, and you get over it, just like we all
Yeah.
got over chicken pox when I was a kid.
Yep.
It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But there are those rare cases where a bacterial pneumonia could follow. And like I said, you treat it. And unfortunately, it wasn't treated appropriately in those two girls.
Yeah. Well, you're my measles go-to doctor. So if we have another massive outbreak and I've got people asking me what to do, I'm sending them your way. Tell us what you saw and what that experience was like in 2025 when you were caring for, I mean, you can tell me the numbers, but more measles than I've I haven't seen. I've seen one case in my career. And most pediatricians haven't seen any. So, what was that like? What did you see? What did you learn from that?
Um, how much time do we have? No.
Oh, let's give it 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I'm like you. I don't think I'd seen a case prior to that I could recall. So I was pretty naive. Of course, I've read about it. And then the news started coming out of Gaines County, which Gaines County is about 90 miles south of where I practice in Lubbock County. But I do have patients in our practice that are from Gaines County and in the Mennonite community also. We've attracted some of those patients. So I'd heard about it like everybody else on the news. There's this outbreak. I heard the fear mongering going on. Didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. And then I did see a case actually came to my clinic. So of course I did a little bit of reading and researching, and real quick and easy. You can find vitamin A. There's plenty of historical data that vitamin A decreases mortality rate in measles. And a lot of these studies are coming out of Africa. So a lot of those are malnourished kids and, potentially more vulnerable kids. And even in that population, dramatic reductions in mortality with vitamin A. And I'd already known vitamin A was good for respiratory viral illnesses anyways. So that was going to be my go-to. And then I knew about vitamin C just in general for all illnesses and stress events, but especially because I'd read Suzanne Humphrey's book, Dissolving Illusions. I knew about the pertussis, whooping cough, and vitamin C protocol. And we've historically used vitamin C in our clinic. I intravenously will do vitamin C even. So those were kind of just naturally the two things that I started to look at and read about and get prepared to utilize in that one case I saw in my clinic. And so that was it. I was just minding my own business, saw the one case, not a huge deal. And then I got a phone call. This was on a Friday. And it was somebody from Gaines County that said, and a lot of people forget this part, that a man died at home from measles. It's what I was told on the phone. And he was in this community that is kind of isolated and they don't believe in doctors. And the person that called was just worried that this could outbreak in that whole little community and spread, and he died. So it was this big panic thing of death, which it turns out the man did die at home unattended, and nobody really knows for sure. I think he tested positive for measles post-mortem, after death at autopsy, maybe with a PCR. So the accuracy of that test, and did that actually cause his death? I don't think so. But there's a lot of unknown there. But in that moment, I thought, this person's really worried. And of course, the media is really hyping the fear at that moment. And I thought, we need to just get down there and start some vitamin C drips on everybody and load everybody up with some vitamin A, which I prefer cod liver oil. So I actually got on the phone to some local health food stores in the Lubbock area, and they were all sold out of cod liver oil because, this had been going on for a number of days or even probably a couple weeks at that point. And so the word was out on cod liver oil, sold out. So I actually made a couple of phone calls to one of my Mennonite friends and said, hey, how many people are really sick down there? And she couldn't tell me accurately, but it was a lot. So I was kind of doing a worst case scenario. Number one, is this really measles? Why would people die from it? Something doesn't add up here. Is there something else going on? Something's going on, obviously. So I was kind of, going in a little bit blind, not knowing, but I'm kind of used to seeing patients in our integrative medical practice that don't fit the textbook. So I'm just kind of used to thinking outside the box a little bit. But then the big thing happened was the little girl that passed away that I mentioned earlier from pneumonia, but that was the big announcement. First measles death. That really got things stirred up. A little girl dies, supposedly from measles. And I got a phone call from Gaines County, actually a patient of mine that lives there, and said, hey, the mom and dad of this little girl that just died, they're fearful that their other kids are going to die because there were 4 other children in the house and they all had measles. And basically, could you come see the kids, assess them, do whatever you can, but mostly just calm the fear in mom and dad. So these weren't my patients, but the lady that called was a patient. This was on a Saturday. So I went down there to Gaines County, it's about an hour and a half drive, and go to the church. They were actually having the viewing for the funeral the next day. And the lady that called me, who ended up being my translator the whole time, because a lot of these folks would just speak German, she wasn't sure if they'd let me into the church because it was the most conservative sect of Mennonite, but they did. And so I'm in the church, in the room where they had the body of the little girl, open casket. All the families are coming through, paying their respects. I'm examining the siblings, talking to the dad through the translator, kind of noticing out of the corner of my eye all these families just streaming in, and they all have quite a few kids, and they all have a rash, and they're all coughing.
Oh boy.
Pretty much. So I'm just noticing, man, there are a lot of sick kids here, and there's a lot of respiratory component to this. And the siblings of the little girl that died, they were coughing, but listen to their lungs, examine their chest. They weren't in respiratory distress. They weren't struggling to get their air in. Their O2 sats were okay. I mean, overall, they were sick, but okay. I'd grabbed some cod liver oil and vitamin C from my clinic before I went down, gave it to the parents, instructed them on the use of that. So I'm ready to leave. I'm thinking, okay, talked to mom and dad, prayed with them, encouraged them, and I'm ready to go home. Well, the dad pulled me aside and through the translator said, "Hey, my sister has two little babies, twins. I think they were 4 months old, if I'm remembering right. They're both sick with measles, real sick, have been sick for a number of days. They're not eating much. And as you know, babies that tiny that quit eating get dehydrated and it just snowballs real fast in a negative way." But he said she's been at the emergency room in the little tiny hospital in that local community and wasn't, she was in the park, was told to wait in the parking lot. And it had been 45 minutes. And so she was really nervous and worried about these babies. Could I go see them? So I said yes. So
You got on your horse and buggy and off you went.
right. We actually met her at her house, and the translator and I did. And those babies were sick. One of the babies in particular was super, super sick, really hot, high fever, almost to that respiratory distress kind of state. When I listened to his, wheezing, just crackly, little bit of retractions, and just that look of dehydration and sunken eyes. I mean, sick. The color's not right. Actually, a lot of that, he was covered with so many blankets. So just a little education. Let's get the blankets off. Let's cool this baby down. Just doing a basic thing like that, cooling the baby helped. But the way the lungs sounded, it was distinctly reminded me of COVID, the way COVID lungs sounded to me in the adult patients back during COVID, which we treated COVID aggressively, outpatient and effectively. But it just reminded me of that. And budesonide works so good on the inflammatory component of COVID, as Dr. Richard Bartlett discovered and kind of made popular. I thought, man, we should try this on this baby because he's a little bit in trouble. Well, there's no pharmacy in this, or the pharmacy was closed. This was a Saturday evening. And so I came back to Lubbock, got the prescription, went back down, gave instruction, and it turned that baby around that quick. He could start to feed again. And by the next day, it looked like a new kid. It was incredible.
Wow. I mean, we did some cod liver oil and vitamin C as well.
Yes, vitamin C and cod liver oil that next day, because what happened after that, so this is into the evening now, that mom told me there's 8 other sick babies just in their extended family.
Wow.
That were less than 2 years old.
Wow.
And so I looked at my translator, Tina, and said, we can't drive all over the county. That's not inefficient. Could we find a central location to tell the families to come to? And I'm coming back in the morning and I'll just see as many as we can. And I didn't know how many that meant. And I asked Tina, how many do you think that is? She's like, I don't know. It could be thousands. I'm like,
what did it end up being?
Hundreds.
Wow. Hundreds of children.
Yeah, I think I have the official count somewhere. It was just over 300. They're way more sick than that. But what happened was the word got out on what to watch for. As far as respiratory distress symptoms, when you really need to be seen versus not so much. Kind of the course of progression of the disease became very, very predictable. So if you're able to get to a certain time, you're kind of over the hump. And the cod liver oil vitamin C protocol became, spread like wildfire through the community. So we didn't actually have to see thousands. We did see hundreds. But that next day when I came back, that dad of the little girl that passed away, he came straight to me at that little makeshift clinic. And he said, Dr. Ben, you won't believe, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was so scared because my house was quiet as a mouse. He said the coughing had been so bad the previous many nights, but that night, 0 cough from the cod liver oil. I didn't give those kids budesonide. Cod liver oil and vitamin C only. They slept all night. So, I mean, that was just confirmation for me. Both the baby, the 4-month-old that turned it around that fast, those kids, the siblings that turned it around with cod liver oil, vitamin C, and that budesonide. So that was kind of the mainstay of our treatment. And we called one of the cod liver oil manufacturers that I trust, and he was able to help on the weekend. That was a big deal. This is a weekend. And this gentleman at Jigsaw really went above and beyond. And actually a local Gaines County resident came to me that day and said, I've got a private plane and I've got a pilot, and you say the word and we'll fly wherever we need to fly. Wow. So this particular warehouse was in Arizona, and the Jigsaw CEO, Patrick, said, how big's the plane? What's the weight how much weight can this plane hold? We're going to load it on. And that's
Oh
what we
my
did.
goodness.
I forget the number of pounds, hundreds of pounds of cod liver oil and vitamin C, boxes of this stuff.
Wow.
So that was a Sunday morning. My son and I, my oldest son, we went to Gaines County Airport, and met the plane and unloaded all that and went to this little makeshift clinic, which was an empty warehouse that the owner of the warehouse is a brand new warehouse, really clean and nice actually. But they brought all the chairs and tables and everything we'd need and the staff to staff it, which was lay people that spoke German. And the Mennonite folks just brought, well, we told them, because this was Sunday morning, there's 12 different Mennonite churches, and my translator was able to get to each pastor, each leader of each congregation, and from the pulpit they were able to announce, hey, be at this location starting at 10 a.m. But first, 2 and under. If they're sick, 2 and under goes first. After that, 10 and under. So kind of triaged and prioritized that way. And that Sunday, we just saw a bunch of kids and stayed up late doing it and came back the next day and did it again. And I forget, I have to go back to my journal. I started journaling all this. 2 or 3 days, we just saw a lot of kids. But we learned a lot in that time too. And what I noticed was breastfed babies. I started to ask, breasts or bottle, vax or unvaxxed, all that. And those breastfed babies, dosing mom up with cod liver, squirting little in the baby's mouth too, they weren't as sick. They bounced back a lot quicker. I got to the point where I'm not even going to worry or check on them anymore. There were standard American fed kids there, though, Mennonite kids eating goldfish and standard food, because they're some of the, just like in every population, there's some lower socioeconomic, and they were getting government assistance, and at the local grocery store in Gaines County, just getting standard food. So there were some that I think were more vulnerable from that standpoint, and bottle fed, and just their immune systems weren't where they should have been. So I started to learn to really watch those kids, treat them more aggressively, maybe go budesonide a little earlier, cover with clarithromycin antibiotic for that pneumonia that can come later. Made a ton of house calls. We just saw a bunch of kids.
You did what the entire CDC couldn't do or didn't do single-handedly.
Well, yeah, and the CDC actually did call early on. It was the acting director, Maneras, called my cell phone. I'm in my clinic. This was barely when it was starting, the outbreak started. And she was supportive and encouraging on the phone, so it was good. But then they started getting all their measles team together, and they called and said, it's going to be a few days. Our rapid response team has to go through different testing. I don't know, I think COVID testing, flu they're making sure they're not sick. That's going to take a few days, and we got to do this. So, it was going to be a number of days for the rapid response team to come.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you for your support. That's great. Come on. But I'm going to just keep doing what we're doing because these kids need help now. This Texas Health Department obviously was involved too. That was a little frustrating, because they were just limited in what they could say. I actually talked to the doctor on the phone and said, hey, here's what I'm seeing. And I told him what I just told you. This 4-month-old baby responded to budesonide like that, just like with COVID. Amazing. And here's, what these folks, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm doing. Could you get that out in the community, the surrounding, clinics and hospitals in the area? Could you kind of let them know? Because the Mennonites were kind of scared to go to the hospital after that baby died. There were some other circumstances at the hospital where the care could have been a little more loving, I'd say. But the word gets around fast in that community, and they felt like they weren't going to be taken care of appropriately, so they were just staying home, in which I was worried someone was going to stay home too long, past the point if there was a respiratory issue going on. But the health department said, no, we can't do that. We can't put out a memo about budesonide or anything else. We can only say, get the shot, get the MMR vaccine. And I said, well, that's not a treatment. Yeah, and you can't do that with a kid who's sick. That's contraindicated if they have a fever and they're sick. And number one, a lot of these folks just are not going to do that. Number two, it's not medically indicated. It's contraindicated. That's not a good answer. We need to treat. We're talking treatment. That's a preventative. We can have that discussion later. Let's talk treatment. And these kids are responding to treatment. And a lot of this is fear They don't know what to do. They're not
Yep.
educated on this. Doctors don't know what to do. It's just this total fear thing. And all they're hearing is MMR, MMR. I mean, it was just so weird, crazy that
So
we
you
forget.
took the sickest of the sick and single-handedly saved all their lives. I mean, they weren't all going to die anyway, but you really set an example for the world. So now we've got fear mongering again. Measles is here, and all they're offering is the MMR. Budesonide needs a prescription. So our viewers or anybody that's trying to deal with this at home, they can do the cod liver oil, they can do the vitamin C, but they're going to need to get a prescription. If their doctor won't write them the prescription, is that something you're able to do through your Veritas Wellness Clinic?
We can do that if they live in Texas. Out of Texas, we're not licensed, but we are looking to add practitioners who are licensed in other states, or actually some of us getting licensed in other states. But there are some telehealth options with more freedom-minded or health freedom-minded physicians out there where you can get that done through telehealth. But there are more and more doctors that I think are opening their mind to being a little more patient-focused and if the patient's requesting stuff, if there's not a total contraindication, being a little more open to doing that. We've had a number of doctors reach out to us to ask for, protocols. But yeah, I would say most people aren't going to need that budesonide, especially if you're doing the right things to steward your immune system. And the cod liver oil in particular, and extra vitamin C, the first time you feel anything coming on, not just measles, but any kind of respiratory or infectious, just get after that vitamin C. Do it every hour, just like the Humphreys protocol for pertussis. You may not have to do that much as you would on pertussis, but you shouldn't have to. Measles really is. All those kids I saw, I did give out some budesonide to some of the sicker ones. Probably, I was going a little more aggressive, but I think it was mostly because everyone was so scared. And just having that in their hand, you could see just...
You've got your emergency treatment should you need it.
Right.
And you no longer have to fear measles. So given your experience and your understanding of this, when might it be important to consider an MMR? Let's say you're living in a, US or industrialized country. Is there even a place for it anymore?
Until it can be proven to be safer, I'm not sure that there's any time I would say the risk of the actual infection versus benefit, when you really weigh that out. We're talking if you're looking at SIDS death, if you're looking at chronic inflammatory conditions, if you're looking at future even cancer and heart disease, when it's so easy to treat this particular illness, I'd be hard pressed to find a time where I would say the benefit outweighs the risk. I'm not saying there's never a time. I hardly ever say never, but
if nobody took the MMR, hypothetical situation, which probably won't happen because the fear keeps people going back, but is it going to be the end of the world if nobody took it starting today? What's going to happen?
No, life will just keep on humming right along like it did in 1950 before the vaccine was widely used. I mean, just like my parents' generation, it'll be exactly like it was then. You'll get measles, you'll get over it, just like the chicken pox before that came out. You get sick, you get over it. So no, we're just going to keep living life. Nothing to fear
if
at
you're
all.
listening and you're worried or you are fearful, I hope you are now reassured. This is Dr. Ben Edwards, who was at the forefront of the largest epidemic we've had in a very long time. And with confidence, I mean, you even had measles and you're not afraid of it. I thank you for your courage.
You need to steward your immune system. And this is across the board. People just think about the immune system for germs like measles. We're in a chronic disease epidemic. And these chronic diseases, a lot of them are directly related to the immune system via autoimmune disease like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, even asthma and eczema, autoimmune. But all these chronic heart disease and cancer are really immune and inflammation related. All this chronic disease is rooted in inflammation, which is rooted in a dysfunctional immune system. And I would submit people to consider that we're getting what we asked for, because what we're doing with modern pediatrics is we're suppressing cellular immunity. That's part of the immune system that creates symptoms like snot and vomiting and diarrhea and cough. We give anti-snot, vomiting, diarrhea, and cough medicines to suppress all that. And then we're given a whole bunch of injections early and often that tells the antibody producing part of our immune system to rise up and make lots of antibodies. And that's exactly what's happened. So we've got this imbalance in the immune system. We've got a chronically inflamed population now manifesting as chronic inflammatory-based diseases. So we've completely reaped what we've sowed. And we thought we knew what we were doing, and it turns out we don't. So we've got to take a holistic approach to this as we look at this disaster of health that our kids and our adults too, our entire population. We are the sickest country in the world of the industrialized world. We have the highest infant mortality rate. So, you said if MMR just went away tomorrow, what if they all went away tomorrow? Here's my prediction. SIDS deaths would go to just about zero. I would predict that all these autoimmune and other inflammation-based diseases would start to quickly go down. Type 1 diabetes escalating like crazy, that would start to subside. It would be my prediction. That's my guess. That's my personal theory. We would get more normalization of the immune system and better, robust health.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel exactly the same way given my experience. And I would just add to that, as parents, we have to watch toxins coming at us from all over: food, water, air, stress, media, screen time, EMF. There's so many sources of things that all are kind of putting stress on our immune systems. But thank you for being so bold to speak out as clearly as you have. I'm just so grateful for you. Thank you, Dr. Ben.
You're welcome.
I'll
Dr.
give
Paul.
you the opportunity for the last word for our parents who are out there still worried.
Well, mom and dad, I know how it goes. I used to be more in that fear camp, but fear shuts the immune system down. So be bold yourself and be encouraged. And just if you need to get more information to help combat the misinformation, then go do that. But ultimately, I think it's just trusting that we're amazingly designed. And if you give the body what it needs, avoid what it doesn't, it'll function like it's supposed to. It used to be that way, and it can be that way again. So just eat real food, move around, get good sunshine, good activity, good hydration, get the sugar water out. It's these basic things that will help you to steward that immune system. And most importantly, don't walk in fear. And a lot of this good information right here, CHD TV, want to give y'all a plug. I love y'all. Children's Health Defense in general, amazing organization. You've got to find independent outlets who can bring you a more truthful perspective when it comes to children's health. So thank you, Dr. Paul, for having me. For everybody at CHD TV, y'all do an amazing job.
Thank you, Dr. Ben. And you can find Dr. Ben at veritaswellness.com. I'm just in gratitude. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. You too.
I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now.
Good morning, Children's Health Defense, wherever you are. It is my delight today to welcome an author, researcher, mother, writer, Katie Asher, who together with her son, Houston, who is a non-speaker and gentleman on the autism spectrum, wrote an extraordinary book called The Book of Heaven, a story of hope for the outcast, the broken, and those who lost faith. Katie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are just delighted to have you. And as I mentioned before, I have read the book, which is in many places actually hard to read. You had a very tough time in your upbringing and as a mom and as a wife, and particularly with your son, Houston, who until I believe he was 21, was very severely affected by what we call autism after a vaccine injury. And he was essentially unable to communicate with you. And then you and the universe introduced him to letterboarding, and life has changed, well, been miraculously changed. Is that a fair short summary?
That's a perfect short summary. Yes.
All right, so let's start with the vaccine injury. That is a common thread for many of us in the children's health defense world, not by any means all of us, but for many of us. I have a 28-year-old son who's vaccine injured on the autism spectrum, so I have some inklings, but your story is unique. So tell us what happened to Houston. What was the injury that you perceived?
So whenever he had the DTP shot, which was actually pre-DTP, this is actually the one that the 1986 vaccine manufacturers protection law was responsible for that law coming into place. It was because of the DTP, the live cell. That is the vaccine that triggered everything. He received it. Within a few days, I started noticing a few red freckles. And I thought, gosh, he's young to get freckles. We lived in Florida at the time. So I'm like, he's not in the sun. Like, is he in the sun? I was like, how is he getting freckles? And I thought maybe it was a rash because of baby food or something like that, because I was introducing new foods. The next day, there were a few more. And I was still very cautious about, I didn't want to be, alarmist. The following morning was a Saturday morning. I went in to pick him up out of his crib, and he was head to toe covered in these little red freckles. I called the pediatrician. They immediately said, come to the doctor's office on a Saturday morning, which I did. The doctor took one look at him, walked out of the room, came back, said, we've had him admitted to Arnold Palmer Hospital. Would you like an ambulance? And I said, what? Why? And they said, we need to run tests. When I drove him there, I didn't want to put in an ambulance. I still was trying to be, non-alarmist and cautious and just, controlled and emotionally holding my own. And a hematologist met us there, and she said, your son either has leukemia or immune thrombocytopenic purpura. I didn't know what that second word was. And so I just waited. They came back a few hours later, and they said, he has immune thrombocytopenic purpura. This is a vaccine injury. His immune system has gone into overdrive and is killing off all of his blood platelets. He can die by bleeding to death internally. That was the beginning. We had multiple infusions of gamma globulin, IVIG, and this was over a course of months, and I didn't want any more vaccines after that. And instead, the pediatrician told me that was a fluke. There's nothing to worry about. The next vaccine was the MMR, and that's when the horrific GI issues started. He completely vanished right in front of our eyes. I will say that the one variance, did he lose any skills after the first one? The first thing I saw was he couldn't play patty cake. He lost the ability, which of course now I know is midline, right? But back then I didn't know what I was witnessing. And then he lost the ability to roll a ball. And I remember him putting his hands on his ears and squinting. That was the first signs.
Wow. It's so shocking that a pediatrician, even then, even now, because I'm sure it happens now, would tell you after that kind of catastrophic reaction, idiopathic, thrombocytopenia, purpura, whatever, that they would tell you to go ahead and take more vaccines. It's just, it's such a catastrophe.
Well, in 1997, which was when that was, it was immune, not idiopathic. They actually changed the name of it because so many individuals started getting it, and they knew exactly what the cause of it was. It's not idiopathic.
Sorry, I shouldn't have said idiopathic. Sometimes they call it idiopathic. Yeah. Well, there's never anything that's truly idiopathic. We just don't know what it is. Yeah. No, it was vaccine induced. And the idea that somebody would tell you that, oh, don't worry about it, take another combination shot with 3 live viruses. It's just, it just never ceases to shock me. So he lost skills. You describe in the book that he was a wanderer, which a lot of people on the spectrum are. He would elope. He had, he would smear his poop. He couldn't talk to you. Obviously, and you had 4 other children. It must have been incredibly challenging.
It was, it's hard to even put into words that period of my life, but it was perpetual trauma. It just never ended. And you're in this state of hypervigilance where you can never, ever, ever let your guard down, not even in your sleep. Even in your sleep, you're at this heightened tension because he never slept. So I never slept. So we never rested. And I described this one horrible instance where this was right after my son eloped and was struck by a car and drugged. And literally, he was 3 years old. It's terrible. It was so bad. He's in the hospital. I have a newborn, a 6-week-old, and I came home and I'm nursing him in bed and I'm so exhausted. And I fell asleep while I was nursing him and rolled over on top of him. That was the kind of absolute, utter exhaustion that I was in. And it still terrifies me to this day when I look at pictures and I think through those memories. I try not to go back there. Writing the book was difficult for that reason.
I'm sure. So I think we first learned about you in Houston, Katie, through the telepathy tapes. We heard about Houston and you in Atlanta. So let's fast forward if we could. I think it was 2018 where you learned about letterboarding and Houston started to letterboard. I think our world is still waking up to the extraordinary implications of letterboarding. Tell people a little bit about letterboarding and about how Houston took to this and what it's done.
So my introduction to letterboarding was, I had heard it from someone and it seemed incredible, but almost too incredible. And I had the thought, like a lot of parents have, that will work for your child, but it won't work for mine because my child is more severe. That's a common thought people have. And then I saw a friend of ours whose son was as severe as Houston, and I saw him letterboard. And what he said to me was extraordinary. He said, I saw him spell the whole thing. Do not let time or money detour you. Do not let the fact that you have tried a zillion interventions over the years, make you gun shy. This is the real deal. It works. We don't need a cure. We just need a chance to be known, the same chance that everyone else gets effortlessly. I was sitting there watching this with my jaw on the ground because I witnessed it. I saw it. He was just as severe as my son. So I had this eyewitness account. I went and got the training. I sat down with Houston and we began. And it was like, I call it the summer of spelling, right? It was like, and he described me as a beast, because I was relentless. Like, we are going to do this. I'm going to get that same type of self-expression that I witnessed. But it was far greater than I had anticipated. His very first independent words were an answer to the question, if you could put any slogan on a t-shirt, what would it be? And he spelled, I'm in here. And I felt like I had just witnessed the birth of my child. It was that emotionally staggering to have a fully developed child of mine suddenly enter into my life with the full capacity when all I had witnessed was this chaotic body for 2 decades.
Yeah, extraordinary.
Yeah.
And then just again, I'm going to fast forward. So you learned that he's unbelievably brilliant and also incredibly spiritually attuned. Tell us a little bit about that. And then I want to talk to you about your thoughts on how that is related to vaccine injury or not related, because it's such a common experience now. We're finding out that particularly these non-speakers have an extraordinary communion, as Houston does, with the divine, with the world beyond what we see and feel.
Yes. And so I would say, as soon as he started communicating, very quickly, it was revealed this spiritual awareness and the spiritual depth of his being and his devotion to Christ and to doing the will of God and to pursuing God's kingdom, not his own will. And that was fundamental to what I realized. And I was still struggling with, doubt and despair and anger and all these other emotions. And he was so completely, wholeheartedly devoted to something so much greater and a higher purpose than what I was focused on. Now, that is true. That is fundamentally the entire purpose of our story, is to share the spiritual depth and awareness that Houston and other non-speakers have. But to kind of go to what you were referring at, so how is this related to vaccine injury? So I think what's really important for people to understand is that everything in the material world actually comes from the spiritual world. And that's actually what's referenced in John 1, where in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things are made through him. Without him, nothing that is. Now, okay, that sounds all like, theological and all, but what does that mean? And I tell this story in the book and in the telepathy tapes about the whole little exercise of, what is a table? What is a chair? And everybody usually goes, okay, well, what was it before it was a table or a chair? And people say it was the raw material, right? It was wood or metal or whatever the raw material is. The second question, though, is actually fundamental to understanding what the real answer to that first question is, because it's a thought. Everything comes from a thought. And the second question is, if no one had ever had that thought, would that material thing exist? And it wouldn't. Material cannot manifest itself. Matter can't manifest itself. So whenever Houston started revealing this spiritual depth, and as well as this incredible intelligence, I'm asking the question, well, where'd you get all this knowledge? Like, where did this come from? Because you've been in a self-contained classroom. You've never been educated. And he said that I'm special. I can hear thoughts. And I didn't believe him. And so I started testing him. And of course, he is able to hear thoughts. And what people need to understand is that thought is energy. It's actually the fundamental foundation of all matter. In fact, E equals mc squared means that energy and matter are the same thing. They're just measured in different ways. Thought is energy, so it behaves according to the laws of energy. And the very first is the law of conservation, which says that energy is neither created or destroyed, it's only transferred. So that's what's actually kind of happening. Now, how does this relate to vaccines, right? Because that's the big question I get. So we are all a spirit. Everything comes from spirit. And so we are fundamentally a spirit with a material body. So when we're born, we actually come into this world with like massive amounts of sensory synapses. And that is to orient ourself, our being, to our body, as well as to orient our body to our environment. And those first, like when you have a newborn and they, like you pick them up and their arms go like this, like that's the alert reflex. And that's because the vestibular system and the proprioceptive system actually haven't oriented yet. You know how like when you get a new phone, how it has to orient and it spends all that time like circling, trying to find where it is in the environment? It's the same process for your neurological system. So once your vestibular system is like foundational and it knows where it's at, that begins the process of creating neural motor pathways to integrate in with the sensory synapses. The sensory synapses, through the developmental process, begin to prune. So you're taking in less information as you gain more motor.
Right.
The vaccine injury, the very first thing it does when those macrophages attach to the aluminum, which I know if everybody doesn't know, let me let you know, aluminum has an atomic number of 13. That means there's 3 electrons in the valence shell. This is aluminum hydroxide is a nanoparticle which can bypass the blood-brain barrier. Those macrophages can go into the brain tissue, triggering a cytokine storm of interleukin-6, which one of the very first things it does is it starts attacking the myelin sheath on the neural motor pathways. So they lose those motor abilities. Those are no longer insulated, so they're essentially losing those motor capacities, which is the regression that so many parents discuss. The next thing that happens is that aluminum is now in the brain and it causes encephalopathy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the last thing that the brain is going to do if it's inflamed is prune itself,
Mm-hmm.
because that would be dangerous.
Yeah.
So the inflammation prevents the pruning from happening,
Mm-hmm.
which prevents the motor from integrating in with pruned sensory synapses.
Mm-hmm.
So they're still taking in all this massive amount of information, which is information that includes the material realm as well as the spiritual realm that's all around us. And then they don't have the capacity to plan their motor because the motor never integrates with the sensory. That ability to still continue to take in that much sensory is
Yeah.
really at the crux of
Yeah.
their spiritual awareness.
That's fascinating. That's a really great explanation that I've never heard anybody give before. And so, one of the things that I think your book, among many others, brings across is that autism is, first of all, a garbage diagnosis
Yes.
that's reflecting a certain kind of brain injury, but that really what we call autism has nothing to do with cognitive impairment. It has something to do with apraxia, the inability to do motor planning. And as you've just described, if the aluminum is attacking the myelin sheaths and then basically the brain can't integrate and prune properly, that helps to explain why the motor piece is so injured for so many people with autism.
Yeah, and it's not just the injury, in so many other capacities. For example, the cytokine storm doesn't just attack the myelin sheath, it also attacks the entire body. So you've got all the other systems that are functioning improperly. For example, it damages the gut, which is where the neurotransmitters are actually produced to help, communicate those motor messages. So without the accurate neurotransmitters, the brain can't accurately, communicate the messages. And then you have the liver and the kidneys that are not able to detoxify. So you've got massive amounts of ammonia and histamine and all these other issues that exhibit as behaviors, but are actually a toxic overload. In addition to that, the encephalopathy significantly distorts and distresses the 12 cranial nerves that are in the brain. What does that do? Well, for example, just with the optic nerve. So what people don't realize is that vestibular system that I was discussing, it uses your visual system and your auditory system to orient itself. So if your optic nerve is destroyed and your visual system is not taking in accurate information, then there's no way for the vestibular system to orient itself. And then, of course, if the vestibular system doesn't work, the proprioceptive system doesn't work, which is how much force you can use.
Right, where things
How
are
many
in space.
times?
Yeah.
How many times have our kids been called aggressive or lazy? That they're attributing a behavior to an actual expression of force, which the person with the disability doesn't have any awareness of even how much force they're using.
Right. So many things go awry, but what didn't go awry was Houston's intellect and more remarkably his connection to the spiritual realm.
Yes.
And so the book is primarily your writing, but the last part of it, Houston wrote through the letterboard, I imagine, Katie?
100% through the letterboard, one letter at a time. A significant amount of it was with me, but another significant amount of what he wrote was with one of his spelling coaches. And I remember he would come every day after he would spell with him and he would be like, "Are you ready for this?" I'm like, "Not really, but go ahead, give it to me." And it was just a download of what it's like to be in his body, what he's actually experiencing, and what we do in the perception of being trained as materialists, which we're in a materialistic realm. And so we think with a materialistic lens, but we have the bias that what we're observing with our senses is the same as what other people are observing with their senses. And whenever you don't go through that pruning process, or you've had damage to your optic nerve and your vestibular system, you're perceiving a very different experience than someone else who's gone through the neurological process typically.
Yeah.
And one of the things I shared was, and everyone, like a lot of these non-speakers talk about how they see energy on everything.
Mhm.
And what that is again, it's the taking in more information.
Right.
You and I perceive about 4% of the actual energy around us. And what people need to understand is everything is energy, everything.
Mhm.
And we think that sight is sight and, taste is taste and sound is sound. We think like that, but it's actually not. It's all energy. And so when you can perceive more of the energetic spectrum, you're able to hear light. You're able to taste light. You're able to smell sound. Like, this is so extraordinary because you're just having a greater aware. This is why they're actually far more brilliant, because they're actually taking in more information and able to process it. What they can't process is the motor.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I don't really have a number for how much energy they can perceive,
Yeah.
but we can only perceive 4.
Uh-huh.
They can perceive a lot more. And for reference, look at animals. We know that animals can perceive more information than the rest of us. And that would be a way to kind of open your mind up to, oh, they're having a different sensory experience than I'm having.
Yeah. I'd love to hear. So the book was 2021, and the book includes some of Houston's aspirations. He was going to college with AIDS. Tell us a little bit about what Houston is doing now, Katie.
Oh, goodness. Unfortunately, we did take a pause on college because I work full time. We don't have as much funding to help with having an aide to go to school. And so it was too much for me to go to school with him part time, work full time, and provide his care. So right now we are focused on woodworking, playing the piano, singing. We work out every day. Like, we are huge at the gym. And he's also working on speech as much as possible.
Wow. Oh, that's so exciting. That's fantastic news.
We have this wonderful little tool right here. I'll show everyone. This is amazing. But basically he can speak into it, and it provides bone conduction to help him get some sensory feedback of his own voice.
Wow, that's so cool. So tell us, why did you and Houston really make the decision, which it sounds like it was a hard one at the time you made it. Why did you decide to write this book? What is the mission of this book?
I will use Houston's words because I did not want to write the book. And that's very clear in the book. I did not want to put us at risk to share all of this really challenging to our perception ideas about the spiritual realm being all around us. And I just wanted to keep us safe and talk about presuming competence. And Houston said that if he couldn't write a book about God's love, he refused to write. And so I was like, well, okay, fine, because I'm not going to put us at risk. And I believe it was absolutely Houston's prayers and his incessant belief that God would answer his prayers is what caused this book to come into existence. And what he says is, malevolence and love fight for us. That's what's going on in us and around us. He gave me a task to tell what I've seen, to tell of his love, to be his herald. I'm without any doubt friends with Jesus. I don't want anyone to die not being his friend. Most importantly, hear this: anything is possible if you believe. And that's one of the extraordinary messages of our book, is that our thoughts actually are powerful. They are energy, and they become our lives. So this is why the Word of God is so insistent about taking every thought captive and bringing it into alignment with his will. We're supposed to be bringing his kingdom come, his will be done, not our own. And that's hard for us who've been raised to be very, self-oriented, self-ambitious, self. And this is the humility of saying, no, die to self and live for God, live for something greater.
It's such a beautiful phrase that Houston has, that he's God's herald. There's something so, and I find many of the non-speakers have a kind of very distinct, almost antiquated language, right? Like, hark the herald angels. They really are from a different age. They're from a different realm, but it's such a beautiful phrase that he's God's herald.
Well, and that was so interesting to me, is like when people would question their words, I'm like, I don't talk like that.
Nobody talks like that. No, exactly. So what are you working on now, Katie?
Right now, we are just continuing to promote the book and finding opportunities to advocate for non-speakers, because what we really want is to change the education system so that children with disabilities of all varieties are included and have their communication rights and their education rights intact and respected. And we also are working just furiously to bring awareness about what severe autism actually is, that it's a vaccine injury, and holding the institutions that allowed this to happen to our children responsible for the injustice that was done. One of the other things is how families are having to deal with this long term, and that they need the justice given back to them and their due process rights reinstated, because that was absolutely legally unethical for them to take away our right to due process. There is no constitutional right that Congress can take away.
No, the 86 Act and the PrEP Act are unconstitutional. Everything that's been done in the health arena is extra constitutional. It has nothing to do with the Constitution, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Well,
those are the things we advocate for, and they are incredibly important to us. And people ask me all the time, well, will you stop advocating for this, for justice, or for, and I until we are completely reestablished and restored from everything that was taken, and everyone else is as well, I will not stop advocating for this. The one other thing that we also encourage everyone to do is to hope and to believe in miracles, because Houston is adamant that he will be healed. And so everything we do is towards that. I was asked in an interview, well, will you get a chip put in his head so that he can communicate? And I said, what are you talking about? He can communicate. He spells to communicate. That's valid. He doesn't want an artificial artifact in his brain. In fact, he wants the healing that God already promised and accomplished on the cross for him. And that's what we're expecting to happen.
That's great. Katie, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing in the book and sharing this interview with our viewers. I hope that people will get the book. It's incredibly inspiring and fascinating. Thank you so much for all you do.
Thanks so much.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.